thousands of cases, hundreds of decisions, 9 justices, 1 Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court was created by the Judiciary Act of 1789, which set up the federal court system and made the Supreme Court the final authority on constitutional issues. In 1801, just before leaving office, President John Adams passed the Judiciary Act of 1801 and rushed to appoint Federalist judges, known as the Midnight Judges, to keep his party's influence. One of them, William Marbury, never received his commission. When Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State, James Madison, refused to deliver it, Marbury sued. The Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice John Marshall, ruled that Marbury deserved the commission, but the law behind it was unconstitutional. That case, Marbury v. Madison, was the first time the court struck down a federal law, establishing judicial review and greatly expanding the court's power, setting it up for how it is today. The Supreme Court has long shaped how Americans understand justice, equality, and fairness. Its decisions have sparked major shifts in social attitudes and transformed everyday lives. In 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson upheld the idea of separate but equal, legalizing racial segregation and fueling Jim Crow laws across the South. It reinforced racial divisions, especially in schools, where black facilities were anything but equal. But in 1954, Brown v. Board of Education reversed that. The court ruled that school segregation was unconstitutional, sparking the civil rights movement and energizing leaders like MLK and groups like the NAACP. Fast forward to 2015, Obergefell v. Hodge made same-sex marriage legal nationwide. It wasn't just a legal victory, it marked a cultural shift, increasing acceptance and visibility for the LGBTQ+ people across the country.
I can just say, reflecting in my lifetime, I never thought that would happen. It was so different when I was your age in terms of how society viewed LGBTQ issues.
Moreover, in 1973, Roe v. Wade recognized a woman's right to choose abortion, giving women greater control over their bodies and helping push the women's right movement forward. But in 2022, Dobbs v. Jackson overturned Roe, ending nearly 50 years of federal abortion protection and putting the issue back into the hands of individual states.
Look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade,
sparking protest and renewed national debate.
The United States Constitution's vagueness about the role of the Supreme Court has allowed it to evolve politically over time. After Marbury v. Madison, the court took on the role of upholding the Constitution, which included establishing the balance of federal power. In McCulloch v. Maryland, it reinforced the concept of implied powers through a case involving the creation of a national bank. Similarly, Gibbons v. Ogden used the Commerce Clause to give Congress authority over interstate trade. But as the nation aged, the court also began to limit federal power. In the 1857 Dred Scott v. Stanford, the court struck down the Missouri Compromise of 1820, claiming Congress had no authority to ban slavery, favoring the South and deepening national divides. In response, President Abraham Lincoln added a 10th justice in 1863 to ensure an anti-slavery majority, showing how politics shaped the court. Together, these decisions created a trend of using the Supreme Court to pass agendas.
You know, our Supreme Court justices are appointed by the president. The president is democratically elected, so it should be that the Supreme Court reflects democracy. But sometimes there's a sort of delay.
During the Great Depression, the court rejected much of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. In response, he proposed the 1937 Judicial Procedures Reform Bill, or court packing plan, which would allow him to nominate more justices who would likely be more sympathetic to his legislation. Although it failed, it highlighted how political the court had become. Political shifts also mean shifts in decisions. In the 1974 United States v. Nixon, the court refused President Richard Nixon's attempt to use the executive privilege to avoid conviction regarding the Watergate scandal.
And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice,
therefore limiting executive powers. However, in 2024, the court expanded executive power in Trump v. United States, in which it ruled that the executive had absolute immunity for certain criminal charges, including President Donald Trump's involvement in the January 6 Capitol riots. So has the Supreme Court truly fulfilled its role fairly and without bias? And how can it improve in the future?
I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think to take money and political influence out of the courts completely, it should be as unbiased and as transparent as possible. I think it would help people look more fairly and objectively at issues that come before them.
Over time, the Supreme Court has confirmed its role as interpreter of the Constitution. It has influenced how Americans see justice, equality, and fairness through decisions on social and civil rights. It has established the balance in government by both giving and limiting powers. Although not perfect, the Supreme Court is one of the most important aspects of American democracy.